And you're Joanna Garner. Do I
Joanna
pronounce it
Garner.
correctly?
You got it.
Good to have you. We connected when you were at Meow Wolf, and I remember this quite resonant post where you announced that you're leaving in December, which was supposed to be about a year since the post, and then there was a bunch of massive layoffs at Meow Wolf later. And that's not the only company that was laying out artists. Tell us a little bit about the timeline of things and what made you quit such a marvelous company, and what is the company about in general? Because
Yeah.
we know it's
It,
creative, but
it's it's one of the most creative companies I've ever gotten to work with, and I think is doing some of the most interesting and creative work in the world, which is why I was so excited to be there for about 6 years. So I started with the company in 2018, which was pretty new into their foray into business. They had been an art collective, this sort of punk DIY anarchist art collective in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And there's a great documentary that the company made about their origin stories that really does give you a taste into the beginning, where, it's a group of kind of punk artists literally stapling trash to the walls in a warehouse and, banding together to make art experiences for the Santa Fe community that were different from, the kind of pretty tepid art that Santa Fe is known for, which, sort of Southwestern themes and things like that. So from the beginning, they were really interested in shaking things up and offering different types of experiences with art where, you weren't just looking at art passively from a distance, but you were touching it, you were being inside of it, you were fucking with it. And so they after many years of different sorts of experiments, they convinced George R. R. Martin, the guy who wrote Game of Thrones, who happens to live in Santa Fe, to buy this old bowling alley, the Silva Lanes in Santa Fe, and become their landlord. And that group of artists built their first permanent exhibition, which they called the House of Eternal Return. So it's a 20,000 square foot massive art and story experience, completely maximal. So there really was room for every artist's vision that worked on the project. It's very wild, psychedelic, and there is a story container. So you walk in and you see this 2-story Victorian house literally built inside of a bowling alley. And you can walk inside and you're going through the rooms of the house and you start to learn the story of this family that lived there. And the story is that their son went missing, and in trying to find him and bring him back essentially from the dead, they break open time and space. And so the house then becomes this portal itself into these other realms of reality. And so you can climb through the fireplace, you can walk through the refrigerator, and on the other side is just this kaleidoscope of experiences. So, really one of the largest and most well-known immersive experiences, installations in the US and in the world. So that opened in 2016. The company, pretty quickly skyrocketed to notoriety, and they had big articles and press going out, New York Times, Rolling Stone. And so the company scaled up quite quickly. I mean, it wasn't even a company. They became a B corporation. They took on large investments. And so I was hired in this sort of first wave of bringing on more professional type people to help figure out how the company was even going to do this again, because they had signed deals to open exhibitions in Denver and in Las Vegas. So when I came on, there was just the sort of like, wow, we did it once. How the hell do we do it again? And twice, and with totally new stories, new art. So I was with the company, like I said, for 6 years and watched it grow, from a few hundred employees to a few thousand, and really struggle with this sort of like start and stop of massive growth. And then, oh my God, maybe we went too far, pulling back, layoffs, and also just, chasing the shiny things, trying to figure out the straight course through what does success look like? How do we, be good to our investors and our board and our creative employees? And so, after really trying to figure out how to make my job work for me, as a creative human working in what was becoming a bigger and bigger business with the demands on its employees that a, growing corporation has, as opposed to a smaller scale arts organization, I felt the constriction in a way that was not great for my creativity, and when I left, I didn't feel like I wanted to speak out because I love Meow Wolf and I love a lot of the people that work there still and the vision of the company. And so I didn't feel like, oh, I need to say anything publicly. But then, not long after I left, they did announce that they were going to lay off, 160 people or something like that. And there was just this little, like, I don't know, little spark inside me where I was like, man, I really feel like I want to say something because I watched, the company grow and I watched decisions being made that I feel like could have averted the need to lay off that many people, and I'd also watched the company lay off literally half of the workforce during pandemic, and I had seen the ways that really hurt morale and challenged the business. No layoffs are a necessary evil. But at this moment last year, I was like, I just think Meow Wolf could have done it a different way. And, I think this is a larger question for me is like creative businesses, should they be thinking about business more creatively, or as you have creativity as part of your ethos, do you still play by the same rules, the same sort of capitalist playbook that gets us to massive growth and expansion and ROI for our investors? So long story short, essentially, I did write this article about why I left the company, but it was really more kind of a prayer for anyone who is running a large scale company that relies on creative employees as its ethos, as its innovation and its force. A prayer to really look at what those creative employees need to survive and to thrive in your business, and to not think of creativity as just a commodity that can be easily churned out, but to really do business differently in order to honor the creative spirit. So that article, I was never really expecting that it was going to have so much traction. I wasn't like, I didn't really have a big following on LinkedIn or anything. I was just like, I got to put it out somewhere that's where it makes sense. And it really caught on like a fire, because I think a lot of people across creative industries feel the same way. And I got so many responses from people at many different large scale creative organizations, big companies, who were just saying, yes, same. So that's launched me into this last year of really consulting and talking to people in creative business and asking the questions like, what do we actually need? And is there a world in which what creatives need to create can exist within a capitalist system, which is in a lot of ways antithetical to the creative process? So that's where we are now.
Right. What was, just remind me briefly, what was the timing of that post of yours or article?
Yeah, it came out in April of last year. So I left in December 24. Yep.
Gotcha. So we were already 2 years into the layoff cycle or something like that, because we started seeing mass layoffs pretty much everywhere from tech to the creative industry as of like mid 2022. So that was already late stage, I would say. Okay, righty. We got it. So I think this is a very interesting subject, because you brought the case of like conditions for art and artists to thrive in a capitalist society, but at the same time you're approaching it from a perspective of a massive company, right? Because like I was under impression that Meow Wolf is around 1,000 something. You mentioned few thousand, right?
I mean,
so it's a massive
was the sort of max.
So it's a massive organization. And yes, you use the term corporation, and that's exactly what needs to happen at that scale. Typically, when I think about creative companies, they are much, much smaller, like maybe Disney aside, which is like a massive corporation, agencies, creative studios, production companies, and artist collectives and all these kind of entities, they are usually, 10, 20, 50, maybe 100. Like large VFX studios are 500 to 1,000, but these are like Titanics, right? The way I'm looking at it is that this kind of size requires a corporate structure, which is hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where travel starts, right? Because if I look at the industry from the bottom up, usually it started by creatives who learn the business along the way. And, they do it better or worse. If they are more business savvy, they end up with larger companies with more structure. And if they are leaning more on the creative side, they end up with much smaller, more manageable, more flat flat structure architecture, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very, very different world. And yes, there is tension. Let's talk about it. What is it that you were seeing in a corporation of that size that was concerning, or like what was the dynamic? And just for the record, let's talk about it in general, broadly, not specifically about Meow Wolf, right? Because there are so many companies going through the same, and these things are like really universal, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have seen them at other companies and talked to many other people working at companies. I mean, I think I will say, like, what Meow Wolf was trying to do and is still trying to do, that is, I think, a beautiful vision, is to give employment to lots of artists and creative humans. So the fact that they are that big is a testament to, I think, the founders wanting to give artists a creative home and to, have people have stability in their careers and things like health insurance and paychecks and stability between projects. Because obviously, as so many creative endeavors are project-based. So then, you as creative are sort of jumping in and out. You maybe don't have consistency of income. You have long gaps between projects. And so, Meow Wolf, I think originally was like, let's bring people on. And when we have, downtime, we'll have other creative projects that they can dip into. And, we'll have a lot of room for, free-ranging investigation of creative ideas. I mean, that was sort of the initial idea. Of course, that doesn't always really work when it comes down to things like the bottom line and productivity and efficiency and all of those things. So yeah, I mean, what I saw there and what I've seen across creative industries, I mean, there's a kind of number of major categories. So I'd say one is just the reality that creativity is not something that's sort of easily put into a box of productivity, commodification, efficiency. I mean, it's just, as anyone who has been in a creative process of any kind probably can appreciate, creativity is more ephemeral than we would like it to be sometimes. If you're like, okay, great, I've got a 30-minute break between my Zoom meetings, and in this break, I'm going to have to, create the new concept for this campaign. I mean, yes, sometimes a time limit is helpful. Sometimes, putting parameters around something is helpful. But a lot of times coming up with an amazing creative idea actually requires a lot of space, a lot of time, a lot of ability to kind of wander and get lost. And, that's why so many of our creative ideas in the shower or when we go out, for a walk in nature, those things are in contrast, because what I would see in a company like Meow Wolf is, there's so many projects happening. There's so many deadlines happening. Everything is really like you're pushing to get it done as fast as you can on the lowest budget possible. And that requires a sort of speed of work that is, lots of meetings, lots of deadlines. You're creating, very tightly tied to a timesheet. As the company grew, it was, okay, you're working on this project for these hours today and this budget. And, that's just not always how the creative process works. And I would say, in particular, creative innovation doesn't work that way. I mean, you can hand an artist a brush and say, paint this thing in the next 3 hours for this project, sure. But when you're asking creative humans to innovate and actually come up with the next big idea, it's a lot harder for that to happen within a tight time frame, or only when you're sitting in a Zoom meeting, or only when you're working in an office. Anytime you sort of put these tight constraints around creative humans, you really are constricting that kind of ephemeral creative flow that can happen. And so for a company like Meow Wolf or any creative company that is making their money based on innovation, based on the weirdest, wildest, most mind-blowing, mind-bending, groundbreaking idea, to say like, okay, we want that from you, and you have to do it, within 8 hours of Zoom meetings in a day, or, we have these offices for you and the lighting is fluorescent and you're going to sit at this desk. And, it's just, there's some kind of core needs that I find that creative humans require in order to have, the optimal creative flow. Also it's like a good balance between conversation, collaboration, and time to yourself. Every creative has different ways of working. So how do you adapt to those things? How do you regulate your nervous system? I mean, and that's, I think, a really big hurdle that your artists and creatives face at big companies, especially if there's a lot of fear around your job security, your money, like, what's my next project? Am I going to lose my income? Those things, those circumstances make it pretty hard to create under. And then I think the system that gets created in a corporation that is sort of wired for ROI for our investors is, like you said, it's a hierarchy. And the more it grows, the more layers of, bureaucracy and decision making that occur between the artists and the people at the top, which is sort of, it's strange. That's generally how it works, right? That you have the people at the top making the most money and making the decisions about how the people at the bottom are going to spend their time and use their creative brain power. And so the more layers you put in, I think the harder it is to have transparency, to have clear, what I would call change management. So this is like a sort of soapbox that I often get on because I spent time in my previous life before Meow Wolf as a change management consultant working for Nike and Nordstrom and some big companies, and who like have a lot of change regularly happening in their companies. And they know that change, like any kind of change, is really tough on the human system. I would say it's particularly tough on creative humans who tend to be more emotionally sensitive. And so when you have a new change that's being put into the company, whether it's just like a new software system or, an reorg is coming or a new, workflow, it's going to send people into a little bit of a creative crisis. And so how do you help the company through that level of stress? So, the bigger a company gets, I think the harder it is to manage large scale change that's happening. So that's also, you see at all these levels, there's this constant churn of like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's coming. I don't trust that the people at the top have my best interest. And there's like a communication breakdown and a lack of desire to tell everyone everything because, you feel like you have to hold things close to your chest. And all that does is sort of further the lack of trust. So, it then becomes the sort of perfect storm of, okay, you're asking people to do their best creative work, but you're not really giving them the circumstances to do it. You're not giving them the time, the space, the regulated nervous system, the trust, the security. And so then you're creating from this place of anxiety, scarcity, and disparity also, and I think that's the last point I'll say that, I've really seen, and I have a lot of questions about, is how much should artists and creatives be paid in a large corporation, especially when your value proposition, that your key offering to the world is creative product. Should you pay those artists that are the ones coming up with the new, brilliant, creative, wild ideas? Should you pay them, equal to the people who are making the business ideas, making the business process happen? And generally, the answer that companies come back to is no, because creativity is generally devalued in our society. It's seen as a hobby. It's seen as something that feels good. So then, well, you're getting to spend your day painting a picture. Why would I pay you as much as I make spending the day in board meetings and looking at spreadsheets? So, originally, it's funny, when I first started at Meow Wolf and I was in a more executive role there, and the company was smaller, so I was reporting directly up into the C-suite. I I still adhered more to that sort of capitalist mindset. It's funny, like even I was like, yeah, I'm in all these meetings, I'm making these big decisions. Like, of course, and you're sitting around writing a story. Why should you make as much as me? And then as the company grew and I like moved down the chain, because they just added layer and layer and layer above me, I started to be like, oh my God, I was doing it. I was the
Mm-hmm.
problem. I was the bad boss. Um, and seeing like it's just a different skill set. And in asking people to tap into their creative flow and bring forth something that is like truly unique, that should be valued just as much as the person who's sitting there making a decision about where we're spending the money. And in some cases, we should be challenging our creative business leaders to think creatively in the same way we're asking our creative employees to think creatively in order to create art. And so
That's a
that's a
good
lot.
point.
Yeah, like where can sort of inspire our business leaders to adapt those same principles in terms of, creating new neural connections. I could go into a whole other deep dive around, the uptick in psychedelic use and, the sort of ways we can expand our brain. But I think that we can do that work as just tapping into our sort of creative flow. In that same flow state, it's kind of all ways into the same place. So forgive me for going a little like woo-woo spiritual here, but I really believe that, when you're in the sort of flow state, creative zone, and you are channeling through, I mean, I think a lot of us know that feeling, right? When you're in it and something is moving through you, whether you're writing or painting or dancing, that you don't have full control over. It's just like, this has to come through now. That experience is the same in my mind as being in deep meditation, as doing a plant medicine experience, as doing breath work. Maybe they feel different, but they're all sort of ways of touching into a deeper subconscious way,
It's the flow
being.
state, right?
It's the flow state. Yeah. And so, how do we also help our business leaders get into that space so that they can be making business decisions, in the same kind of connected, deep relationship with the larger network of being alive? So,
Mhm.
that's sort of a tangent, but I do think that there are, and like I said at the beginning, if we're going to be in creative business, can we do business more creatively? And so I think there's sort of two sides of the puzzle. One is like, how do we actually optimize the experience of being a creative in a large company to produce the most creative, innovative work? And then how do we optimize the experience of being a business leader in a creative company so that they're not separate, so
Yeah.
they're just two arms of the same being, essentially.
Right, right. Gotcha. Well, it's so many interesting things that you mentioned. One that I'd like to relate to is the angle at which you approach or define creativity. Because as someone who has spent 2 decades running creative companies of various kind, to put it more in perspective, let's think about design for like in place of creativity. I come from a world where, yes, the work we have been doing and, people that I hired and people that they worked with and like everybody in the ecosystem is like, we're in a creative business, and it means that we're paid to ship. We're craftsmen, right? We may go to more or less of artsy at times when there are conditions, but like the basic mode of operating is like, we're craftsmen. We're paid to deliver. And with that, I think that there comes much more discipline and craft rather than pure artistry and the party vibe of like, let's throw another Burning Man or Coachella event, right?
Yeah.
So I'm used to this kind of discipline and looking at creative business through the lens of discipline, which is like my baseline. So from what you're saying, it seems that there was an inevitable clash, because on one side, the way I understand it is like the value proposition was the punk, the raw, the untamed creative spirit, which is absolutely free flowing and explosive and all these kind of things. So very far from like craft business. And on the other hand, there is this, like, firm corporate structure that needs to make these people deliver at the end of the day, right? So it's clashing. It's apparently clashing. And the question I have is like, okay, how come has it happened that out of something which was like purely creative and this untamed spirit, all of a sudden there were like imposed structures which were clashing with the spirit? Like, was the company founded by businessmen that wanted to package creativity and sell it to the world and get a lot of money for investment? Or that was a company which was started by these creative artists? And if so, how come they have found themselves in a position where they are imposed with so many like super strict rules that they cannot really adhere to?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's an important one because, I talk to a lot of people and work with a lot of people who are in a creative startup, or they want to create some sort of creative business. And it's always like, but how do I prevent it from happening? How do I prevent the sort of massive growth and corporate control that we've seen in a company like Meow Wolf? The thing that I love about Meow Wolf and the founders is that they have always seen the importance of balancing chaos and order, and that both of them are needed to succeed in a creative venture. You can't have all anarchy, chaos, wild, creative punk rock spirit. Eventually you burn yourself out, and self-destruct. So you need to have order sort of bringing you back into line, and then, the sort of cycle of chaos and order and rebirth and death over and over again. The company was created by artists. The initial founder group and founding collection of artists were pretty much all makers, largely visual artists. But they did have within them at least a few sort of more business-minded folks who were interested in, one, creating a permanent home for the company, but then in sort of the business of Meow Wolf being their creative expression. And that was largely Vince Cadlebeck, who was the first CEO of the company. And again, there's a very interesting documentary that the company sort of made about itself in those early days called Origin Story that really walks through how this happened. And so I'm not sharing anything that's not already public knowledge, but Vince was really the major force behind the businessification of Meow Wolf, and for good and bad. He was the one who really led the charge in raising money and getting George R.R. Martin on board in order to buy the bowling alley and make that first investment happen. And then, from there, they took on some more investors and became a B Corp. And we're still really figuring out, like, what does it mean to be a corporation that, doesn't fit totally right, and that's when I came into the company. It was still very early in like we have an HR department. Okay, it's one person. We'll see what happens, And so there was, I think at the beginning, this idea of like, yeah, we're going to reinvent everything. And then at some point someone's like, well, do we really have to reinvent spreadsheets? Like, do we really have to reinvent the system by which we think about project management, and so then that's where they started bringing in some people that had more industry knowledge. Okay, well, this person's done something similar at Disney. They're burnt out at Disney. They want to come to the punk rock collective. And so they're going to bring their knowledge base in. Okay, so we did this at Disney. We had these phases of a project. Let's adapt that. And then slowly you start to get more and more order in the system. And, I think Vince was a CEO with a lot of vision and a lot of ability to get people excited about the future, and that's what I think made him a really powerful leader. But he didn't have any business experience. He had never been to college. He had never run a company before. And so, in those early days, it was very much like the Wild West. We were all trying to figure out how you make a business. And, and I think there were mistakes that were made that sort of led to the company growing very quickly because there were all these different possibilities. And, Vince was excited about seeing where any of them could take us. So, there was like a lot of chasing sort of the shiny object that maybe would manifest. So in addition to the two exhibitions that were happening, there was also Meow Wolf Entertainment. There was a whole entertainment studio, and we were like, you know, having a deal with Amazon, talking to lots of different possible film, game, TV partnerships. There was music videos being made, there was theater performances, and there were novelists on staff. And then at some point it was like, whoa, we are bleeding money. We've got to pull back. So, I think the cautionary tale is really about, how fast you're growing and the balance between let's bring in systems from other companies versus what really works for us and thinking about that. And then, what is the return on investment for our investors? How much money are we, needing to track towards that investment versus, building the culture of the company and supporting those artists. So has sort of been the balance. And I think the company over the years has swung farther and farther away from the punk anarchist collective vibe to the like super corporate structured side. And will probably, as long as the company exists, probably always be a little bit in that dance between. And I'll be very curious to see, what the next phase looks like in that dance.
Right. From what you're saying, there comes to my mind the great line or perspective coming from Rory Sutherland. He said something along the lines of peculiarity of logics, and the curious thing about it is that if you look at logics and taking, the best practices and all these kind of things, the inevitable result, and I'm paraphrasing it right now, is that it will lead everybody to exactly the same position, right? To the same result. And it seems to me that it applies here big time, because if you bring these minds which are in corporate management, and what they will do is they will recreate the systems and structures which have been proven operational everywhere else, and therefore it transforms whatever it is into the same, a copy of the system that they are used to working with. So in that perspective, if you're still serving all the stakeholders and investors and all these kind of things, at the end of the day, does it still matter that the very thing that you promised on the beginning was creativity or creative spirit? Or you could easily replace it with potatoes, right? Like if you look at a spreadsheet, there is no difference between a line item for a potato and for an artist. Is there?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. And I think that is sort of like a deep ethical question that we're asking kind of on a global scale right now, at least in the United States. In our current political climate, there is a lot of fuel behind this sort of like wealth disparity and the potential of an oligarchy and the like people at the top of multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar companies viewing the people at the bottom as lines on a spreadsheet. And, and that's where you see a lot of momentum behind something like Eat the Rich, where the people at the bottom are saying, wait a second, why am I a line on a spreadsheet? Like, is that really how you see me? And I think that's where we get into trouble, is when there's such a large gap between the people at the top of the company who just are looking down, seeing numbers and saying, how do we just maximize our profits? That's the only thing that matters, is maximizing our profits. Then you start to get to this place where we're at now, where we're like, wait a second, are human beings profits? Are human beings the well-being of the human beings that are making your commodity? Is that less important than the profits themselves? Is that really the case? The answer, unfortunately, has been yes. Your well-being is not as important as the money that goes to our shareholders, the money that comes back to our investors, the money that lines the pocket of the CEO or the founders or whoever. And I think that's one of the biggest crises facing our world right now, is that we are not able to see the humans at every level of our corporation as human beings. And holy fuck, that is terrifying.
Yeah. It is. And it is even more terrifying as you're saying that to me right now, because you report on the US perspective. And I can't help but remember of history and the lessons that Europe has gone through and the lessons that were learned 100 years ago and something, right? With like systems and with what happened in, during World War II and, concentration camps and all these kind of things. And excuse me, quite rough comparison, but I think it's applicable here because we're talking about systems which are uncontrolled and which are optimized for efficiency and maximizing one single outcome, which is profit in that case, right? So we've seen in history cases of like what it leads to. And this is a lesson that Europe has gone through, but unfortunately it's closer to us probably compared to what people experience in the US, but at the same time it's fleeing. And this is really scary, because if you look at the cycles of history, we're at the moment where these lessons were lived through, but the last witness who have been through the hell are no longer with us. And with that, all these lessons are becoming just, pages in a book.
Yeah.
And not lived experience. So like with that in mind, it's not so strong anymore. And it's scary.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in the US right now, we're seeing a push to actually take some of those lessons out of our education system. There's a real push to not talk about race, to not talk about history of what's happened in this country, especially in sort of racial dynamics, which is terrifying, because exactly like you're saying, if we're not talking about what happened, how are we going to know what could happen again? And I think as artists, one of our greatest gifts and responsibilities is to be the one who is writing or speaking about what's happened in the past and then recontextualizing it for the present, to make meaning out of chaos, make meaning out of pain. And, I think there's definitely a feeling right now, at least in the US, as I'm tracking on social media and with my friends, of, a sort of tidal wave of fear and overwhelm and, oh my God, helplessness. I don't know what's going on. Is this country spiraling out of control? And, and how to create from that place, that's very difficult. It's very difficult to create from a completely contracted, overwhelmed space. And I would say that may be what our government wants, to put people in fight or flight. And so, my prayer to our artists and creative humans is just, can you just take a breath, and just come back into the moment and in your body. And, I know that's hard when it's like, what, you want me to fucking unclench right now? Like, I got to be ready to fight, but we have to be doing whatever we can to sort of like come back into our nervous system so that we can do the thing that we are called to do, which is to make meaning of what's happening, to be a reflection of the world, and to be dreamers of a possible future that is different than our current reality. Let's pray for that.
It's quite interesting because we approach creativity from the standpoint of like having comfortable paradise for us artists to create out of, right? And I get it. This is one of the angles. And of course, it's a paradise for creatives. But at the same time, if I look at a huge chunk of European art and design, it's massively fueled by rage against the system, against circumstances, against history, against the political reality that we faced, especially in Eastern Europe. So I think that it's the second pole, and I think that this second pole can be extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Rage is an amazing place to create from, right? Like maybe it doesn't feel comfortable, but it's very potent, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and I think the difference for me is like, if you are being tasked to create within the system of a corporation, and that is your job, then I feel like it is the duty of the corporation to create the circumstances by which you can do your job the best.
Right.
It's not going to, you as an artist, your rage is not going to yield what the corporation wants you to create. Okay, so that's sort of separate. I think outside of your job, outside of being, hired to do a job and create for a company, then then your art can
Now
and
we're
should.
talking, right?
Yeah, then it's like what's alive inside of you and how are you creating from that place of aliveness, and I talk a lot about in my own work and teaching about erotic energy and the creativity, the sort of like the place where our sexuality meets our creative impulse. And in a lot of ways, you can substitute the word erotic or eros just for aliveness, and so it's just what is alive in your body. And it
Yeah,
might be, I am so angry, but you have to sort of, it still has to come from a channel that can move out. You're angry from a place of contraction. You're probably
yeah,
not channeling it into art. But if you can take that breath and feel it and then put it into your work, like that's where truly groundbreaking, important art gets made.
totally. And one more thing I wanted to relate back to politics and the situation over there is that like the role of art today and the crusade of big tech and politics against art. Like I'm saying it more and more clearly that the reason the whole AI thing and big tech and also politics, which are sitting so close to big tech right now, or in their pockets actually,
Yeah.
to put it more precisely, there is this like massive crusade against art. And the reason for that is that art is about being critical and being in a critical attitude to the world and seeing what's happening in the world and taking a stance against it or like in front of that and expressing that. And it's all about critical thinking, which is so much dangerous
Mm-hmm.
to the forces in power right now in the US, but also globally, which is like big money, big tech, and big power, right? The big three, to put it that way. What do you think about it? Because I see artists that are so excited. Look at this new shiny AI tool. I can do so
Right.
much with it right now. Jesus, you're playing with an atomic bomb right now, kid.
I know. I mean, there is a lot of fear that I have around where we're going with AI, and I think some of the fear is the unknown. When I see the millions, billions of dollars that our people in power are putting into AI development, I'm like, where are we going? And I think some of that is like, if you have technology that is creating entertainment for you, that is creating your artistic expressions for you, then you can control what any message is, And I think that's the danger, right? Of anytime you are trying to squash free thinking, you are squashing dissent, and it's the dangerous, I don't even know if it's the first step, but like it's a dangerous step into a paradigm in which you no longer have free speech. And so
But that's already the reality.
I know. And so anything
Like,
that is really like, squashing the ability for artists to say what they really mean. And I do think you're right. The shiny things are a distraction. And also, I find social media and this obsession with content creation and, views and monetization, art and content are two different things. And right now we so much are wanting escapism. And, I'm guilty of it too. I scroll through my phone and I'm looking for the thing that makes me feel a moment of dopamine or a moment of escapism. But ultimately, like, that's not going to be what changes realities or paradigms. And so, how, amidst all of this, do we cut through and find the will to keep making content, not content that is actually saying something important and in a way that people will listen, because the most impactful art is art that people pay attention to because it moves something, it stirs something inside of you. And so that's going to be the task that our artists and creatives are facing as the world churns. What are you saying and what are you really tapping into that matters and that your soul feels alive to speak?
arrived at quite a clarity about this, and I don't believe that it matters what we say anymore
Mm.
because we are being algorithmically controlled. And it's like it has been slowly cooking up for the last decade or a decade and a half. But right now we are at past the tipping point where it's not done quietly anymore, where the
Yeah.
censorship and manipulation through algorithmic media is so fucking far-fetched that there is no free speech anymore because a few guys controls all the media of the world. Like they control the communication marketplace, which is social media and social platforms. And media like traditional media, right? Like it's broad, but I have so many examples for that. Like, not sure if you're following what's happening on TikTok right now, but TikTok has been taken over by, I guess, by the Americans. It's not official. Nobody knows, but we can suppose so. It has changed already, and it has already been censored. So you cannot really use the word, what was that, inauguration, right? You were
Really?
censored. You were censored. If you go to TikTok right now, people talk about shiny, cozy winter shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're reinventing the kind of language that we know so well from the communist oppression times,
Mm-hmm.
where there was no free speech, so people needed to develop a stealth language. And that's what's happening right now on TikTok, right? So people talk about cozy shoes and deliver their message on a piece of paper in front of the camera, wiggling it around so that they can sneak underneath the radars of algorithms, right? That's one of the examples. It's happening right now. The other one is that, like, literally today, I made a decision to pull off and get out of LinkedIn. And the reason for that is, like, for quite a long time, I was thinking, what is wrong? Why am I not cutting through? And it has become clear to me because I don't have a fake white teeth and I'm not a tech bro putting out the tech bro narrative out there. And that's why my thinking and my posts are suppressed compared to the official supported narrative supported by the platform, which is the big tech guys.
Yeah.
And I have plenty of like numerical examples showing specifically which words affect the reach or suppression on LinkedIn.
Wow.
And it's not just me, it's tough. Anyways, a lot of like fresh thoughts that, come together recently, but I have full clarity about it. And on a human level, I totally agree with you. Art is more important than ever. And it matters what we say and what we think, but it's not going to get through on social media because it's not in the interest of people who hold power and control over social media right now.
Right. Yeah. And what are what is the future going to hold in terms of the way that we talk to each other? Are we going to go back to plastering flyers in cities or, like massive events? I mean, I don't know, because we've gotten so reliant on our phones and on our social media, and it does make us sort of lazy and complacent, and there's this sort of feeling of like, is anyone listening to me? I'm screaming into the void kind of no matter what I'm doing.
Exactly. And that's experience not of just you and me. It's a common shared experience across so many people, right?
I choose to continue to be optimistic because that is to me the only way I can continue to exist and survive day to day. And I am at heart a world builder. That's what I did at Meow Wolf. That's what I've been doing my entire life and career as a storyteller. And I do think we have the opportunity right now to look to the future and say, okay, if not this, then what? What else? Because we can certainly give up. We can just like crawl in a hole. I have done that. I've laid in bed being very depressed. But I think we have the opportunity to dream about, if this is not what we want, then what do we want? What is the kind of world we want to live in? What is the protopia we want to be a part of? And what are the steps we can do to make that happen, even on a smaller scale, if that's...
Totally agree with you. And I have absolute clarity on what it is for me. Like, I reach back in my memories to times before the smartphones where people gathered on a town square and would chat, would visit each other, where there was reciprocity and like human connection. And this is something that is missing in today's world. And like literally today we were chatting with my wife, just, talking about these things and thinking, okay, what are we gonna do next? And my conclusion is that I'm getting out of LinkedIn and similar social media. I'm relying on my personal mailing list and email on my own server to keep in touch with people. And I'm going offline. I'm going to go back to my city and meet in a studio in my place with people, talk with them face to face, and try to revive the sense of connection and attention and also choice. Because the problem with social media is that it has solely transformed the way we make choices into something where we don't make choices. I talk to people, what podcast do you listen to? I listen to Alex Hormozy and 5 big most popular names of few guys that are the loudest, right? People don't choose. People take whatever is put in front of them. And that's all because of the design of social media.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, there's something that was really coming up for me as you were talking, which is social media has made us sort of obsessed with the concept of thousands, millions of followers. Like our success is measured by these vast numbers of people listening to us. And like you said, we defer to have that many followers. That's toward, I'm working on a book right now and my literary agent just keeps saying like, well, publishers really only care about your social media following. They're not really going to look at you if you don't have at least like 100,000 followers. So we're like obsessed with these vast numbers of people that we're influencing. And so it will be a big shift, like theoretical shift, to bring us back to a smaller scale and to think of success being, okay, I had 10 people to my house and we gathered, we met in the middle of the town and 5 of us talked, to bring it back to, instead of thousands and millions, tens. But I do think that our power and our shift is going to come with that perspective. How do we create community, which actually does happen in the dozens rather than the thousands? Yeah. And so I think that's going to be the next step for us, is to come back small again and have intimate relationships with people where we can actually affect change because we have created an intimate, grounded connection.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I come to similar conclusions. The thing that you mentioned about massive following as a proof of your worth. Okay, you mentioned that some people want to chase big numbers on social media, and I get it. But I know so many people that would be happy having some reach, some feedback, some following, because this is something that we crave. Right? We, as human beings, it's one of our needs. I don't need 1 million. Maybe there is 500 or 100 people interacting with me. But the reality of social media today is that there is no place for these people, right? There are either people who get all the billions or millions or nothing, crickets. Right? That's the problem. And the problem with social proof is that it's fabricated these days. Like if you scroll through LinkedIn timeline, you're seeing these suggested posts and all of them are like banals and absolute bullshit, but they are having hundreds of likes and comments. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you will see that these are either bots or fake accounts. And there is over, I think 25% of LinkedIn user base is this fake account property that's being used by these people who use it in order to get these numbers. And it's just a mass scam. But at the same time, it's not just some, elusive beings using this stuff. Like literally, I know an acquaintance or far friend of mine in the consulting space who's doing similar things to what I'm doing. And I'm seeing he's launching his consultancy, and I'm seeing literally yesterday a post, and all of a sudden he's got few hundreds, engagement going in hundreds. And I see it so clearly, like it's all bots commenting, right? Paid fabricated engagement to fabricate social proof. It's just broken. It doesn't work anymore. Like there is no organic anymore on social media.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen, that article I wrote about Meow Wolf, it did give me a bit of faith because I connected with hundreds of real people in like really interesting conversations. But that seemed like an exception more than the rule, like,
How do you repeat it?
yeah. And I think it is, people want a quick, I don't know, incendiary, like snap of something. I think that article attracted readers because they were like, yeah, big bad Meow Wolf, and that was sort of like the headline, even though that really was.
Nullification, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I think does well right now, is like something that gives us a hit without, really requiring us to think too deeply.
Polarization, which we have
Yeah.
been conditioned for. Same story.
Yeah. I know.
Anyways,
Yeah. We
art.
should probably be soon. But I've like so enjoyed this conversation. I feel like there's so many amazing threads here. And
Yeah, we drifted a bit, but that's totally fine. I think the big takeaway, and I don't want it to be like doom and gloom. I'm just like connecting so many thoughts of mine and, recent ideas. But yeah, the big picture is that for me, art is more important than ever. And even in face of like all the circumstances which are against us and against artists, we should stand and like shout out loud, assume strong positions, and like keep doing what we're doing, not necessarily on social media, and then just make impact. That's my takeaway. What's yours?
yeah, creativity is a birthright. We are literally wired to create, every one of us. If you think of creativity as like our ability to create life, that's a sort of a basic human biological impulse. But from that is, our bodies are wired to make something out of nothing. And we've been told for so many years that our creative impulses are only for children. They're only, something that's sort of fun to do on the side as a hobby. And the reality is, it's the most important thing we can do as humans, is make meaning out of chaos, is to dream a possible reality that's not currently here. And creativity is an expression of our aliveness. And so, I continue to hold optimism that the more people we can turn on, more creativity we can hold space for, the more we can change the world. And that maybe sounds Pollyanna, but I have to believe that at this moment in time, or else I won't be able to go on.
I get it. I think we all need that. Cool.
Yeah.
Been a pleasure. Where can people find you?
Well, it's funny, after we talked about social media. Well, I actually just started a Substack, which I really like as a social media outlet, because I can actually write in long form and communicate with subscribers in a little bit more intimate way. So I have a Substack under my name, Joanna Garner. LinkedIn, I have a lot of content and articles that I put out there about business and creativity and storytelling. And then my website is joannagarner.com. I'm also on Instagram, but we're all trying to make it figure
Cool.
out
Cool.
works.
Good, you're on Substack, so we'll exchange it. I'll tag you, and we can put it as a guest post. It will go to your
Perfect.
audience also, I guess.
Yeah.
Lovely. We're done.
Okay. Well, thank you so much